When you look at the American presidency, uh, particularly the sweeping historical narrative of someone like Barack Obama, it's just so easy to view it like this towering cathedral. You stand back and you just get lost in the grandeur of it all.
Right. The soaring rhetoric, the massive crowds.
Exactly. The high-minded vision. I mean, it feels almost inevitable from the outside.
It
Yeah.
really does. We tend to view historical trajectories as these clean, straight lines of destiny. But if you actually go back in time to when that cathedral was being built, you don't see sweeping visions, you see mud.
Mud and, like, dangerous scaffolding.
Yeah, people hauling heavy stones. You see profound moral compromises, physical exhaustion, and just a whole lot of gritty, unglamorous labor.
Welcome to today's deep dive. If you're the kind of person who loves to bypass the polished PR narratives and, get straight to the raw mechanics of how things actually work, you are in the right place. Today, we are unpacking the ultimate architectural blueprints of political power. We're diving into excerpts from A Promised Land, the memoir by Barack Obama. But let's set the ground rules right up front. Our mission today is not to debate politics.
Far from it. We aren't here to endorse a platform, and we certainly aren't here to validate a specific ideology. We are impartially exploring the anatomy of political ambition, basically just as it's presented by the author himself.
Right, we want to understand that massive grinding tension between high-minded idealism and the ruthless, exhausting mechanics required to actually gain the power to implement those ideals.
Exactly. And just to jump in on the terrain we're covering, we will be touching on some highly contentious historical moments, things like the Iraq War and the federal response to Hurricane Katrina.
Which, just to be incredibly clear, we are not taking sides on. We aren't judging those policies or events. We are simply analyzing how those specific moments functioned as psychological catalysts for the author.
Right. We're looking at how they shaped his personal trajectory and forced his hand into running for the highest office. We're essentially dissecting the evolution of a worldview from the ground up.
So let's lay out the roadmap for you. We are going to track this journey, starting with a kid reading rummage sale books in Hawaii, moving through the bare-knuckle political brawls of Chicago, and heading straight into the grueling fluorescent-lit motel rooms of the Iowa caucuses.
It's a wild ride.
It really is. Let's start with the incubation of an idealist, because the future president definitely doesn't start out as some laser-focused political prodigy grooming himself for the Oval Office, does he?
Oh, not at all. He describes his younger self as a young man with a completely wandering identity. I mean, he openly refers to himself as a lackadaisical student.
And a dedicated partier, I think he said.
Yeah, a dedicated partier. Through high school, his main concerns were essentially sports, girls, and getting loaded with his friends. He wasn't running for student government or interning for local politicians. He was drifting.
But there is this incredibly quiet, pivotal moment with his mother that really sets his internal compass, right?
Yes, so he'd been part of a group teasing a kid at school.
Yeah.
And his mother sits him down and asks this deceptively simple question. She says, "Which kind of person do you want to be?"
Why?
Yeah. Are you the kind who puts others down to feel important, or the kind who imagines how others feel and lifts them up?
It's the foundational lesson in empathy. And it becomes the true north for his entire trajectory. And what's fascinating is how that single question eventually sparks a very personal, completely unguided intellectual awakening.
Right. He finds a box of hardcover books at a church rummage sale in Hawaii. Heavy hitters, too.
Like Ralph Ellison and Dostoevsky.
Exactly. He's sitting alone in his grandfather's rickety Ford Granada, reading these massive works and circling words he doesn't even know how to pronounce.
Although it takes a while for those high-minded ideals to actually land in reality. Because in college, he fully admits that his deep reading of Marx and Foucault was mostly a pseudo-intellectual strategy to impress girls.
Which, let's be honest, is highly relatable for a college kid.
Oh, totally relatable. But then he gets to Chicago, and the abstract theory meets the pavement. He starts working as a grassroots organizer, and he is deeply inspired by the election of Harold Washington, Chicago's first black mayor.
Yeah, he sees ordinary people forcing the entrenched political machine to actually listen. He's moving from abstract theories in a dorm room to the tangible mechanics of social movements.
He starts to understand the mechanics of leverage.
Right. He sees that democracy isn't a gift handed down from the top. It's something earned and built by empowering marginalized communities to act as a unified bloc.
But let me push back a bit on this origin story. It's easy to look at a young guy reading philosophy and organizing neighborhoods and say he's just pure of heart. But Does this meandering read as a disguised form of intense, simmering ambition? Was he just waiting for an outlet big enough for his ego?
I'd actually frame it differently based on the text. While he does struggle with his own ego and motives later on, during this specific incubation phase, it reads much more as a desperate search for belonging.
Interesting.
You have to remember his background. He describes feeling like a combination of ill-fitting parts, from everywhere and nowhere at once. The ambition at this stage isn't for power over others.
It's an ambition to stitch his own identity together.
Exactly, and to find a community that makes sense to him. But, as you'll see, that local organizing eventually hits a hard ceiling.
Right, because he realizes that organizing a community to fix a neighborhood park doesn't stop a massive steel plant from closing and devastating the local economy. To change the budget, to change the systemic outcomes, you need actual legislative power.
And that realization forces a brutal collision between his pure ideals and the absolute hardball reality of Chicago politics.
Which happens abruptly during his very first run for the Illinois State Senate. Right?
Yeah, it does. He had been endorsed by the sitting state senator, Alice Palmer. She was a mentor figure who promised to step aside so she could run for Congress.
Effectively handing him the baton.
Right. But then the messy reality of politics intervenes. She loses her congressional primary, changes her mind, and decides she wants her state Senate seat back. She actively tries to push him out of the race.
Wow. And this is where the theoretical rubber meets the very bumpy road.
Yeah. His campaign manager, a veteran operative named Carol Ann Harwell, pushes him to challenge Palmer's petition signatures. In Illinois, you need a certain number of valid signatures to get on the ballot.
So Harwell essentially tells him to knock Palmer off the ballot on a technicality.
Yes. She tells him he can save his League of Women Voters idealism for later.
Let's pause and unpack that phrase because it's crucial. When Harwell mocks League of Women Voters idealism, she's talking about the belief that democracy should be this polite, perfectly fair, process-oriented debate of ideas where everyone gets a turn to speak.
Exactly. She's telling him that Chicago politics is not a polite debate. It's a street fight over ballot access.
Right. If her signatures are technically invalid, and you refuse to challenge them out of some sense of moral purity, you don't get a medal for fairness. You just don't get to play it all.
Precisely.
But this is a massive contradiction. I mean, how does he reconcile knocking a mentor off a ballot on a legal technicality with his mother's lesson about empathy? Doesn't this directly violate the rule of not putting others down to lift yourself up? It sounds entirely ruthless.
It is ruthless, but this is where he encounters the classic prisoner's dilemma of political power. The reality he faces is that if you unilaterally disarm, if you decide to play nicely while your opponents are perfectly willing to use every legal technicality to crush you, you don't stay morally pure, you just lose.
And your ideals die with your campaign.
Right. He realizes that the rules of the game are the rules of the game, and leaving power in the hands of the cynical doesn't make you righteous, it makes you ineffective. So, he challenged the signatures, Palmer was knocked off the ballot, and he won uncontested.
Okay, so he plays hardball, he wins, and his reward is getting sent to Springfield, the state capital, where junior minority party members are literally referred to by the veterans as mushrooms.
Yes, the joke being that they are kept in the dark and fed manure.
It's the perfect encapsulation of political disillusionment. There's this incredible anecdote where he prepares a thoroughly researched, impassioned speech against a corporate tax giveaway. He delivers it beautifully on the floor.
And Pate Phillip, a powerful veteran politician, walks up to him afterwards, cigar in his mouth, and says, "Made some good points, didn't change any votes."
Ouch, that is brutal.
That moment strips away any remaining illusions he has about how legislation works. Pate Phillip is teaching him the mechanics of transactional power.
The underlying logic is that logic itself rarely wins the day in a legislature.
Exactly. Politics in that environment wasn't about having the best argument or the most empirical evidence. It was about leveraging interests. Who owes who a favor? What district gets the funding?
If you've ever poured your soul into a project or a presentation, only to realize the systemic rules of your industry are entirely stacked against merit, you understand exactly how crushing that feels.
It's incredibly demoralizing.
And this willingness to endure this grueling, often unrewarding game starts to demand an incredibly high price. It threatens the absolute anchor of his personal life.
We enter a period marked by the immense, crushing weight of ambition on a family. He and his wife, Michelle, start a family, and the strain becomes palpable.
Because you have to consider Michelle's perspective, right?
Yeah.
She is from the working-class South Side of Chicago. She's deeply skeptical of the political machine to begin with.
Right. And now her husband is constantly absent, driving hours back and forth to Springfield, leaving her to juggle her own demanding executive career and 2 young daughters.
And then he pours gasoline on that fire by deciding to run for Congress against an entrenched, beloved incumbent, Bobby Rush. And it is a spectacular disaster.
He admits it was a hubristic move. He loses by 30 points. I mean, he misread the electorate, he overestimated his own appeal, and he got crushed.
Which leads to one of the most humbling details in the entire memoir. Shortly after this humiliating loss, he flies to Los Angeles for the year 2000 Democratic National Convention. He goes up to the rental car counter, hands them his American Express, and it is declined.
Oh, man.
Yeah. He's almost 40 years old. His marriage is deeply strained. He is politically irrelevant, and he is completely broke.
It is the absolute nadir of his career. He is staring at the reality that his political ambitions have yielded almost nothing but debt and marital strife.
And this leads to a pivotal conversation with Michelle before he decides to make one last, seemingly impossible gamble running for the U.S. Senate.
Right. She points out the stark reality: they have no money, they have significant debt, and they are risking everything on a long-shot statewide race.
And his counter-argument to her is that if he wins, a book deal will magically fix their finances.
Which she literally calls his magic bean strategy.
Right. Like, you're going to take our life savings, buy these magic beans, plant them in the yard, climb a stalk, and bring home a goose that lays golden eggs. It's a hilarious but deeply sobering look at how absurd political ambition looks from the outside.
Definitely. To a spouse bearing the brunt of the financial and emotional risk, it just looks like reckless delusion.
But against all odds, the magic beans actually sprout. He wins the Senate primary, delivers the famous 2004 convention speech that catapults him to global fame overnight, wins the general election, and the book becomes a massive bestseller, solving the financial strain.
It's a crazy turnaround, but arriving in the U.S. Senate as a global celebrity only forces a bigger, much more daunting question.
Because now he's a star, but he's still fundamentally a freshman senator with very little seniority. He takes his daughters to the zoo, and he realizes his anonymity is completely gone. People are swarming them.
Yeah, his daughter Malia even suggests he needs an alias, like Johnny McJohn, just so they can look at the animals in peace.
That's both funny and really sad. But beyond the jarring loss of a normal life, there are specific external catalysts that make him incredibly impatient with the slow, deliberate pace of the Senate.
Well, he travels to Russia and Ukraine with Republican Senator Dick Lugar to work on securing loose nuclear weapons. He sees the terrifying scale of global threats and how fragile international security really is.
And then there are two massive domestic crises.
Right. The systemic governmental failures exposed by Hurricane Katrina and the devastating, chaotic realities he witnesses on the ground during a trip to the war zone in Iraq.
Viewing this purely through the mechanics of his career, these events act as an accelerant. It's like being a highly capable mid-level manager at a massive, sprawling corporation.
That's a great analogy.
You can write the best memos in the world, you can optimize your little department perfectly, but if you look up and realize the core culture of the entire company is fundamentally toxic or broken, you realize the only way to actually fix the system is to take the CEO job.
I'd take it a step further. It wasn't just his own observation. The political establishment was pulling him upward. Ted Kennedy gives him a piece of advice that clarifies the mechanics of political timing.
What did Kennedy say?
Kennedy tells him, "You don't choose the time chooses you. The window to run for the presidency opens and closes rapidly, and if you wait for the perfect time, the moment passes."
But the ultimate hurdle isn't the political establishment, and it isn't his own readiness, it's Michelle. They have this incredibly tense meeting with his core team of advisors, and she cuts through all the polling data and strategy. She asks the only question that actually matters. Why you? Why do you need to be president?
And his answer strips away the policy white papers and reconnects directly to that core idealist incubation we talked about at the beginning.
Right.
He tells her that the day he takes the oath of office, kids all around the country, Black kids, Hispanic kids, kids who have always felt like they don't fit in, will look at themselves differently. Their horizons will be fundamentally lifted.
He argues that changing the psychological landscape of the country is worth the toll it will take on their family.
It's a powerful, visionary why.
It is. But here's the brutal mechanical reality of the campaign trail. Having a noble, historic reason to run for president doesn't magically make you good at actually running for president. Which brings us to the unglamorous, often humiliating mechanics of the campaign itself.
Yeah, the Iowa campaign trail is portrayed not as a series of soaring stadium speeches, but as a grueling, physically and mentally depleting machine. It is sleeping in Super 8 motels, working 16-hour days, eating terrible food.
And operating under the constant, terrifying fear of making a single verbal gaffe that will end your career. And he makes a massive one early on, right?
He does. He's exhausted, and he mistakenly uses the word wasted to describe the loss of soldiers' lives in Iraq. The press immediately pounces, framing him as disrespecting the military.
It highlights this insane dynamic where a candidate's brain is essentially being microwaved by sleep deprivation, yet they're expected to speak with absolute, unyielding perfection on every complex issue.
Furthermore, he genuinely struggles with the specific format of modern political debates. He has this tendency, born from his background as a law professor, to give 10-minute, multi-part, highly nuanced policy answers that weigh competing interests.
Which is absolutely terrible television.
It's a disaster on television. He specifically references failing terribly at a forum hosted by the SEIU, the Service Employees International Union.
For context for you listening, the SEIU is one of the largest labor unions in the country, and winning over their massive, highly organized membership is crucial for securing the ground game in a Democratic primary.
Right. At this forum, he gives these wonky, verbose answers, while his opponents, Hillary Clinton and John Edwards, deliver highly polished, emotionally resonant appeals. They understood the assignment, and he was still trying to teach a seminar.
His media consultant, David Axelrod, has to sit him down and give him the bluntest advice possible about the mechanics of televised debates. Axelrod essentially says, stop trying to answer the question.
Yeah. The moderator's question is just a trap or a distraction. The tactic is to take the question, execute a rhetorical pivot, and deliver the specific message you came to deliver.
Axelrod is teaching him the psychology of modern media. Nuance is punished because it takes too long to explain and is easily taken out of context. The pivot works because it regains control of the framing.
Exactly. You acknowledge the premise briefly and then aggressively steer the conversation back to your core narrative. It's a survival skill.
He eventually learns the performance art of campaigning, but the memoir makes it clear that he really survived this brutal process because of the operational brilliance of his team, specifically people like David Plouffe and Paul Tews.
Yes, Plouffe and Tews fundamentally changed the mechanics of campaign finance and organization. Instead of relying solely on the traditional party apparatus, which meant kissing the rings of high-dollar donors at fancy dinners, they built a ruthless, data-driven grassroots engine.
Utilizing the internet not just as a billboard, but as a continuous mobilization tool.
Right, raking in millions of low-dollar donations. They effectively broke the monopoly of the traditional donor class by turning hundreds of thousands of everyday supporters into micro-organizers.
But inside that massive machine, it's the bizarre, humanizing details of how a candidate actually copes that stick with you. Like, how do you survive the daily grind of losing your autonomy?
You play fiercely competitive, trash-talking games of HORSE in empty high school gyms with your aide, Reggie Love.
Or you stand at the Iowa State Fair with your communications director, Robert Gibbs, laughing hysterically about whether to eat a deep-fried Twinkie or a deep-fried Snickers. Because you know that whichever one you choose, the photographer is going to capture you looking ridiculous.
Those moments of levity are essential coping mechanisms for a process that is heavily controlled and entirely stripped of personal freedom. The candidate becomes the focal point of a massive corporate enterprise, and maintaining any sense of normal humanity requires deliberate effort.
It's a supreme irony, isn't it? To achieve a position of ultimate global power, a candidate must willingly subject themselves to a 2-year process that strips away their dignity, their intellectual nuance, and their ability to just be a normal human being walking down the street.
It is the ultimate paradox of political ambition. You have to surrender your autonomy to gain the power to change the rules.
So let's step back and look at the massive arc we've unpacked today. We've traced the evolution of a curious kid circling big words in a rummage sale book to a community organizer learning the brutal, necessary math of Chicago machine politics.
We've seen the deep strain that ambition puts on a marriage, the humbling reality of a declined credit card.
And finally, the grueling, heavily calculated, deep-fried machine of a presidential campaign.
And the overarching relevance for anyone listening is clear. Whether you are running for local office, trying to disrupt a stagnant industry, or leading a community initiative, this narrative illustrates a fundamental reality. Your hope and your ideals are essentially useless without a parallel willingness to endure the mundane, exhausting, and sometimes morally complicated mechanics required to actually execute them.
You need the beautiful blueprints for the cathedral, but you also have to be willing to carry the mud. And that brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with, something to mull over long after this deep dive ends. The author wrote this memoir after his presidency.
Right.
He's looking back at these moments of unbridled optimism and grassroots hope from a vantage point of knowing the deep, bitter national divisions that would immediately follow his tenure.
Which completely reframes how you read the narrative. It adds a layer of melancholy to the triumph.
It really does. So ask yourself, does the grinding machinery of power inevitably compromise the idealist? Or is diving into the mud, enduring the scaffolding, and playing the ruthless game of hardball the only way an idealist can ever actually force the machinery to change? When you look up at that soaring cathedral, never forget the dirt it was built on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.